Thank you very much, President, distinguished delegates. I wanted to start by acknowledging the many states that are working hard to improve their legislative, administrative, and judicial practices and procedures to prevent and respond to torture and related ill treatment. I appreciate the constructive conversations I have had with many governments over the past year, even concerning very serious allegations. I thank the governments of Switzerland and Australia for funding part of the mandate, and to Chile and Ukraine for their exemplary cooperation with my team on the ground during my country visits. However, I have a question for all states. How many of you have shed tears for those who have been tortured this year? I implore you to put your torture tools down. The global picture is a desperately bleak one. I do not need to remind you of the millions of people affected by armed conflict, where torture is increasingly being applied as a standard, brutal practice rather than as a grave crime of exception. I do not need to remind you of the thousands of people, opposition members, protesters, human rights defenders, and innocent bystanders, many are never named or never known, and who are at risk of torture or have suffered torture already, who have been disappeared or killed, who are detained arbitrarily, and whose families and communities are suffering while waiting for news about their fates. So I ask you again, how many of you have shed tears for those who have been tortured this past year? I implore you to put your torture tools down. Mr. Chair, today I am presenting two reports, the first on prisons and the second on my fact-finding visit to Ukraine. Significant challenges facing prisons are found in some form in almost every country. Prisons are under pressure from too many demands, insufficient resources, and inadequate staffing, and as a result, conditions are often unsafe and inhumane. Far too many people are imprisoned for too long, especially on remand, often in severely overcrowded and dilapidated facilities. Well-managed and adequately resourced prisons are essential in a functioning society. However, with financial and managerial neglect, prisons become incubators for violence, corruption, and further crime. Such neglect exacerbates poverty and the likelihood of recidivism, and ultimately fails to keep the public safe. The link between poverty and prisons, with prison populations being largely composed of members of economically disadvantaged and marginalized communities, calls for states to incorporate criminal justice and prison reforms in their plans for delivering on the 2030 agenda. My report examines a wide-ranging number of issues, from recurring to emerging challenges. Let me start by advocating for human rights compliant prison management. This means that every decision in a prison should be driven by the obligation to treat prisoners as people with dignity, respect, and human rights. Dignity applies to the conditions that they live in, how they are treated, and how their needs are met. Such dignified treatment and conditions also apply to those working in prisons. It is a job that requires careful recruitment, decent pay and conditions, adequate and professional training, and opportunities for promotion. I recommend that prisoner-to-staff ratios are improved. These ratios vary widely across the globe, and as yet, we do not have an international guiding standard. Mr. Chair, prisons should be places where people are offered a chance of social rehabilitation. We need to stop thinking that locking people up can cure society's ills. While we should not be naive about the need for prisons, it is also true that neglecting rehabilitation is bad public policy. For young offenders, it can mean crushing their aspirations. Many have regrets about their actions and choices, and many want and need your help to step off the treadmill of recidivism. Despite the low costs of such programs, many prisoners have limited access to education or vocational skills, giving them little reason to get out of bed. This needs to change, and my report presents a number of good practices. Overcrowding is another challenge which impacts all aspects of prison life. Detaining persons in overcrowded cells is a form of cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. Yet it is an issue that can be addressed via a range of measures, including accurate, regular, and transparent reporting on capacity levels, and ensuring decisions on sentencing as well as pretrial detention are informed by prison capacity levels and conditions. My report further assessed the different needs of specific segments of the prison population, including female detainees, young offenders, and Indigenous peoples. Emerging areas of research included the complexities of accommodating high levels of neurodiversity within prison populations and the menopausal health needs of female detainees. Mr. Chair, my report is also forward-looking. I address two major global trends that have already and will continue to impact prisons, prisoners, and staff. First, prisons are conducive to the spread of infectious diseases. As pandemics are predicted to emerge more rapidly and have more severe impacts, societies need to be ready. Prisons must be included in national pandemic planning. For those of you participating in the World Health Organization's new pandemic instrument, I encourage you to ensure that the special vulnerability of prisons is properly reflected in that instrument. The second major challenge addressed in the report at a global level speaks to the responsibility of states to safeguard prisons and prisoners against the effects of climate change and natural hazards. Almost 30% of the global prison population live in countries that are most exposed to natural hazards. States have a heightened duty of care for persons in their custody, requiring them to protect inmates from extreme temperatures and to ensure that construction design, as well as locations of prisons, are climate appropriate and informed by human rights. Mr. Chair, international standards, foremost amongst them the Nelson Mandela rules, are agreed. However, there are still a few important gaps in those standards, and especially in their implementation. I urge states to rethink their criminal and social justice policies and priorities. Crime prevention, diversion, alternatives to imprisonment, and rehabilitation must be priority areas. I turn now to my report number A, HRC55/52 Add 1 on my country visit to Ukraine, which I conducted from the 4th to the 10th of September 2023. I thank the Ukrainian authorities for the invitation and for their full cooperation extended to me during the visit, notwithstanding the complex security environment of a full-scale war. I especially thank the many victims and survivors who met with me, as well as civil society and other organizations. What I concluded, based on the volume of credible allegations of torture I have reviewed, is that torture is an element of Russia's war policy. These grievous crimes appear to be neither random nor incidental. Rather, the methods, purposes, and targets were consistent and included being applied across multiple temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine and/or inside Russia itself. I repeat my calls to the Russian Federation to issue a strong and unequivocal directive to all of its armed forces and other associated armed groups and other officials under its command or authority that torture is never permissible and that it will be punished, to open investigations into these allegations and allow international monitors into all places of deprivation of liberty, as well as to observe criminal proceedings. In respect of the conditions of treatment of Russian prisoners of war and other conflict-related detainees in Ukraine, the report provides a detailed analysis. In summary, I found the camp that I visited, Zakid 1, was well organized, clean, and largely met international standards. My report raises several concerns about the prison conditions in which Ukrainian nationals charged with collaboration were being held at the penal facility number 19, as also acknowledged by the authorities. Finally, during my visit, I received several allegations of abusive treatment by Ukrainian officials, primarily alleged after capture or arrest and during transit to official sites. I call on the Ukrainian authorities to investigate such allegations promptly, to reinforce training, disciplinary and other preventive measures, and to guarantee the protection of all legal rights of all complainants and detainees. Thank you, Mr. President.